Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming back to our Partner Edge broadcasts here. I'm here with David Aronchick from Expanso. Thanks, David, for joining me.
My pleasure.
And little known factoid, David and I are going to have coffee later this afternoon. So we're actually living near
one of
each
the many
other.
conveniences of being in Seattle.
I know. It's kind of, it's a strange world. I was actually talking to someone from Sony the other day who I've been talking to for a long time. And I thought he was in Japan, but he was in Mercer Island. I was like, you're like 15 minutes away from me. But anyway,
That's true.
small world.
It is a small world.
But welcome. Yeah. So want to talk about Expanso and kind of your origin story here and kind of introduce yourself to the Edge AI community. Why don't you kind of give us what's the backstory here?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting problem, space, everything. So my most recent kind of like arc of the world was I was the first non-founding PM for Kubernetes, and I led that for a bunch of years for Google, and I co-founded the Kubeflow project also while I was at Google. And then I went over to Microsoft to lead OpenAI strategy and worked in the office of the CTO and did some of their early OpenAI work and things like that. So I had kind of bounced around a bunch of different cloud native and declarative platforms over the past few years. And one thing I kept hearing over and over again was, hey, this Kubernetes thing is great. These workloads, containers are great. Machine learning is great. How do we take advantage of it, but not in a central data center sitting in Oregon or Iowa or Paris or Tokyo? Like, turns out that lots of our businesses are, in retail, in manufacturing, in transportation, in buildings, so on and so forth. And compute is growing everywhere. And I was hearing this for years and years. And don't get me wrong, there is absolutely nothing wrong with these platforms, Kubernetes and Spark and Hadoop and Snowflake and Redshift. And they're all great. They are all great, but their stories all begin at the moment you move everything, like I said, into a giant, rectangular building somewhere, generally in the middle.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, somewhere else. So all of that together was, hey, I've had some experience starting things. Let's try and start a new thing where we give people a similar kind of power around rolling these things out, but do it in a distributed way where it's not in a single data center. You can say, hey, you know what? I have 250 stores across the Southwest, and I want to roll out the same job to every one of them. Or I have 5 zones, each of which have regulations in them. So I can't centralize the data. How do I take my ML model and run it over those remote models? Or, hey, you know what? I'm a smart city and I want to do processing of video at each street corner to count the number of people crossing in crosswalks, right? Like, how do I actually get a model there? How do I update that model? How do I change the configuration of that model in a reliable, declarative Kubernetes or container or whatever like way? And that's what we built. So we co-founded this project called Bacalhau. It means cod in Portuguese because we call it compute over data, right? So COD, compute over data.
I thought maybe you had sort of a Portuguese, I don't know, sort of origin story there too.
Exactly.
I saw that. I was like, oh, I've had Bacalhau. I've had that before. It's
exactly. So we were there. We happened to have been in Portugal when we came up with it, and we kept abbreviating it COD because we were just texting each other. And some smart aleck was like, oh, let's call it Bacalhau. I was like, oh, that's kind of a cute name. I'd never heard of it. And then, if you get there, it is just everywhere. I mean, you can't walk 3 feet without seeing it in Lisbon. Like it's on
I mean, it's every restaurant has it, right?
But anyhow, we liked it. We got the domain name. We thought it was worth it, and that's what we provide. And so we started the company about a year and a half ago now. Officially kicked it off and got funded by Samsung and General Catalyst and others. And our mission really is, it's to make compute over data a thing. Now, to be clear, it's already a thing, right? People
Right.
already do this with cron jobs and SSH and, all these various things. What we want to do is make it much more efficient and reliable. And in Edge AI, that is all about like, how do I use AI edge on the edge? And again, by edge, I'm a much more generous person when it comes to
Okay.
edge. Edge for me is anything outside of that big box in
Yeah.
the
Well, I
DOS.
think that's a reasonable definition.
Exactly. So that's edge. So anything outside of that is where you're going to do some data processing. And even though I'm talking to the Edge AI Foundation, it could just be running a Python script or a Bash script
Sure.
or grep or whatever. Or it could be full on, like I said, that video example that I mentioned earlier, people want to transfer video in, but video is way too big to
Right.
send in raw. So if you had a very simple object detection model, on the edge, that simply said, hey, you know what? I'm only going to send back video when there's a human being in it.
Mhm.
Nothing sophisticated. Just
Right.
a snippet that sends
Right.
that back. Cross,
Yes
magic,
or no?
right?
Yes. Hot dog, not
So
hot dog, right?
whether or
So
not it's pull the stuff in or push the stuff out, we help in either direction.
right. And yeah, we've seen so many use cases where, especially in video, you're talking about AI vision. I mean, processing it at the point of impact when you're capturing the data makes total sense, and
Yep.
makes nonsense to actually start moving that video data around
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly.
But like the edge, as we know, is like notoriously heterogeneous, right?
Absolutely.
And so how are you tackling that? Because there's like the Docker container, and then there's Kubernetes, and like, so what are your dependencies on the wild and woolly edge out there to play nice
Well,
with each other?
that's something that's kind of crazy, right? Like in my day, because I'm very old, you would have to have your own completely dedicated build, you know, tools and chain and
Mhm.
everything in order to get your jobs out there. Now it's way easier, right?
Mm.
Go, Rust, so on, they all cross compile. So all you do is you name your thing and you take it out and run. What the way we are architected is we're a Go binary, and Go supports everything.
Mm.
We haven't run into anyone that has a problem, running with our Go binary. It's not incredibly small. I think it's 150 megabytes, so it's not teeny, but it's not gigabytes either. It runs on. Here's
Mm.
my visual aid. This is a Raspberry Pi right here.
Okay.
Runs great on that. And
Okay.
to be clear, what we do is not the job, right?
Yeah,
We
you don't run the
orchestrate.
job. You you
Exactly.
you're like the FedEx envelope, right?
Exactly.
You don't know what to
Exactly
do with
right.
it.
So we orchestrate the job.
Deliver.
If you take whatever llama 405, billion, that's not going to run on that Raspberry Pi. Sorry, right? But that's
Sure.
not our responsibility. That's your responsibility to make a decision on. We
Right.
don't care. We could run it there if it has the power, but at the end of the
Mhm.
day, it's pretty straightforward. Now, what I'll say is that you do end up getting into this interesting topology discussion
Mm.
with a lot of our customers and users where they're like, hey, I'd like to run this over, these cameras, but the cameras are too locked down. And so
Mm.
as a result, we don't run on the cameras themselves. We'll create a nearby node, and those cameras will feed a small subset of the whatever 15,000 cameras will feed into that nearby node. And that's for, a
Sure.
2U box or something sitting in a,
Right.
office building somewhere.
And that's like a
Um,
classic brownfield deployment, right?
exactly.
Where you have a
Exactly.
bunch of cameras in the parking garage. Who knows when they were installed? Nobody's going to touch them. It's all
Exactly right.
it's all capex spent a long time ago. And so now it's like, well, can we add some smarts into these things? And yeah, that's when you would
100%.
route them into some sort of box, and then you can control the workload on that
And
box.
and in truth, I think you just see that over and over again, even on very lightweight scenarios, right? Like
Sure.
imagine, I don't this is my house, so like you don't see it, but like if I was in an office building, you'd probably have a thermostat, you'd probably have
Mhm.
a fire detector, a smoke alarm, whatever. Yeah, a variety of different things in the room itself. That's all brownfield too, right? Now a lot of times that'll be wired into a smart panel in the building, that can be, more sophisticated. But even then, like there's this idea that like, oh no, the only way to do this stuff, anything, is to
Mm.
push it off into that data center. And the fact is that's just never going to work. And not
Right.
because like, I'm deeply incented for it not to work. The reason is because the speed of light, right?
Mm.
In 100,000 years time, the ping rate between LA and Boston will still be 45 milliseconds, excuse me,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
There's no way. You can't get it any shorter than that. That is the speed of light. So, for every byte, for every exchange, for everything where you need to do some form of interaction back and forth, do you really want to be adding, that minimum latency on top
At
of it? Or
least,
do you want to
yeah.
be doing it nearby?
Right,
And
right.
more and more people will want to do it nearby.
Well, and there's also the cost of ingress and
$100%.
connectivity and all this other stuff that, it just doesn't make sense. Plus, there's, deployment issues too around people want to simplify the cost of deployment and, they don't want to have to be throwing data back and forth to make things work. But
100%.
yeah,
100%.
totally. Which is kind of one of the, I mean, again, I'm biased coming from the Edge AI Foundation, but the pendulum swinging toward the
Right.
edge on getting these workloads done. We say connecting AI to the real world, and this is like running AI in the real world, in the parking garage itself, where cars are driving around. So
Yep.
that kind of what happens.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
where do you guys? So you sell into? I saw a little bit on your website. They have a story there about the U.S. Navy and some cool stuff that you did there, and some smart city stuff. And are you primarily focused on the U.S. market? Are you doing like how do you build this business out?
I mean, we go where the folks are. We are,
Mm.
a global project. The project is open source, but the binaries are commercial. The binaries come from us, and they have our whole security, bill of materials, and build chain, and
Mm.
all that kind of stuff. The summary of it is though that we're talking to satellite manufacturers, we're talking to auto manufacturers, we're talking to transportation, aircraft, so on.
Mm.
You know, and I don't mean to like make it all about these like enormous deployments, but it's true. Like those people are feeling this pain right now.
Mm.
Now
Yeah.
that said, I like to say, look, if you've got an Ethernet cable or a Wi-Fi card, congratulations, you have a distributed system, right? It's just the
Right.
way things work. Things
Right.
will get out of sync. Things will, have changes on either side. They will have disconnections. They will have all sorts of things that you end up needing to resolve what happened
Mm.
while you
Mm.
were disconnected. That is just a reality. And a lot of times human beings do that. A lot of times you have automated systems. You're like, hey, if I get, if you look at any of those clustered systems that I talked about earlier, they take a super aggressive position around it. They basically say, look, if you disconnect for even Spark and Databricks, it's like 5 seconds. Kubernetes, I think, is 30 seconds.
Mm.
If you disconnect for that amount of time, we're just going to assume you're dead, and we're going to move on, right? We're going to reschedule the job and so on. And that's kind of broken for scenarios where it's, hey, look, it's perfectly fine that this building was offline for three
Sure.
minutes.
Sure.
Just not the end of the world. Like, just, when it resolves, bring it back together. But like in the interim, you figure it out. And that's really what we do.
Right. So you
So
provide kind of a kind of a resiliency to the orchestration.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Interesting.
So yeah,
Mm.
what I was saying is that to the your question, it's not that we don't solve problems for a lot, for lack of a better term, smaller folks.
Mhm.
Um, because I will tell you, as someone who is deployed, and I won't badmouth any cloud in particular, but it deployed to 2 zones in a single cloud. Let me tell you, it's not fun, right?
Right.
Like if I could have a single network that spanned both of those, that would be really convenient for me.
Yes.
And again, that's something that we just do right out of the box. All you have to do is put a VM in each zone, and congratulations, get the
Right.
scheduled jobs. You can use different Kubernetes clusters, use different storage buckets, use different compute, whatever is available in that zone,
Mhm.
and it'll
Mhm.
feel native. So even if you're really small, like I said, two machines in 2 different zones, we can add value. But where you're really starting to feel the pain is some of the stuff you talked about earlier. You're geographically distributed, or you have 1,000 retail outlets, or you have ingress costs or things. If your
Right.
telemetry bill is starting to creep up, if your telemetry bill is more than 20 grand a year, I guarantee, with no we will deploy and save you 25% right out of the bat, or we work for free. I tell my customers all
All
the
right.
time,
That's a good one.
because we can make that big a difference.
Yeah. And there's a lot of these systems that are, I don't know if the right word is, they have intermittent connectivity or somewhat harsh
Mhm.
environments, right? You mentioned like satellites. I mean, my understanding is like commercial satellites are going to be going down to 10 centimeters soon, and then down to 3 centimeters.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to see satellite usage and in AI vision and satellites to become a big deal, especially for like agriculture and a lot of places where you're not going to stick a camera out in the middle of every farm field or whatever.
Absolutely.
So I think those kinds of systems where the connectivity is, not really inherent, is going to be a big deal. And you mentioned also like with the Navy, and like we had a live stream this morning with SoftBank talking about aquaculture, and
Very cool.
they're using like AI vision to count fish and fish sizes, and they did this whole thing, the deployment out there, and underwater cameras, and connectivity is pretty funky.
I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
this isn't a business discussion, what do you call it, discussion, but would love to hear that. Love to hear what
yeah.
you're seeing.
But there's lots of those deployments, and and it turns out that the real world isn't great with connectivity and electricity and all these other things that we like to have when we're in a data center. So it's pretty cool that you guys are tackling that. And so you've been around for about a year and a half.
Yep.
And are you guys like pretty distributed in terms of your workforce and stuff? You're here, you're in the I should say Pacific Northwest, but is everyone sort of around? I mean, how do you guys organize?
Yeah, we're super distributed, which is good and bad. I miss being in the same room as everyone,
Hmm.
right? I really like it. But you go where the people are. We have a tremendous team from folks all over the place.
Do you have
And
someone in Portugal? Do you have someone in Portugal?
no, ironically, nobody in Portugal. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's funny. I do wish that we were a little bit more centralized, because I
Yeah,
really do love like seeing people, seeing
right.
face to face and so on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's
it's a
interesting
bummer.
you mentioned that. Like I think we, to a certain extent, like we have our community events, 3 times a year. We were in Austin last week. We're going to be in Milan in July, and then Taipei. And, it's a few hundred people, and we get together for a few days. And, for a lot of companies now that are distributed, these are opportunities to get together face to face. And it actually has that good community feel.
Totally agree.
And it's like, oh, I can actually, talk to somebody and have a cup of coffee with them, and show them how my stuff is working, and we can talk about a deal or argue about a standard or whatever. And so it's kind of cool to kind of see people face to face like that. And I think maybe in this age, because I also work from home, I look forward to having those kinds of events where you actually get to see people in physical space for some period of time. So that's a good thing.
Yeah,
Um,
totally agree.
I was going to ask you, so you got involved with the Edge AI Foundation. Thank you very much for your support.
Of
What
course.
what was your what are you looking to get out of the foundation? Like, because you joined fairly recently, but
Yes.
what's your
Well, I
jam?
mean, it's funny, because it's a lot of what we talked about on this very phone call, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not going to have visibility into all the sort of people who are interested in being part of the Edge AI Foundation and joining. You talking about all the customers that you mentioned on this call and previously
Mm.
on the thing. It's and for better or worse, as someone who's gone through this, several times in the past few years, right? Both the move to containers and the move to declarative machine
Mhm.
learning pipelines. I'm
Mhm.
well aware that this is an industry move, for better or worse, right? Talking about setting aside whether or not you use us, though I certainly hope you do, or at least give me feedback about why my product is
Sure.
garbage. Our product. Moving to compute over data feels inevitable, right? because of all the things I talked about earlier about cost and security and time and so on.
Mm,
And in order to do that right, it means us working on standards and frameworks and so on and so forth. And there's kind of no way around that.
right.
And the only way to get to things like that is through rallying points like the Edge, the Edge AI Foundation.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It is a team sport at the end of the day.
Absolutely,
And, there's
great
a
phrase.
stack. There's a stack there. I was telling folks last week, and we were talking about like the Dagwood sandwich. You remember Dagwood, and like you have the cheese and all the different layers in there. And like when you look at Edge AI, there's a lot of layers in there that need to work together to solve somebody's problem. So it's good that you guys you're in there orchestrating, moving bits around, which is important. So
Well, we're certainly doing
good.
our best.
Appreciate that. That's awesome. So, David, thank you so much for your time. I think this has been a great introduction to Expanso. This whole area of middleware and orchestration and how do we get smarter about moving bits around, especially on the edge, is really a hot space. So, I look forward to your future success.
Well, I really appreciate that, and certainly, we hope to do it with partners, with the team that you mentioned earlier, the team effort that you mentioned.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, David, I will see you soon for coffee.
See you soon.